What's up, happy people? You're watching The Young Turks with Anna Kasparian, and joining me today is Ida Rodriguez, host of The Truth Serum and good friend of The Young Turks. Ida, it's always so good to have you on the show with us.
I'm glad to be back, and I wanted just to stop quick, just address some rumors quickly. I did not fall out with the Young Turks. That's not why I haven't been here. I've been really busy, and we are all good. We didn't have a fight or anything of the sort. So please stop putting those dumb comments on my Instagram.
That's so funny. I've been I've been pretty much staying away from social media lately, and I've been really happy. So I haven't been coming across any of those rumors, but no, there's like this whole instigator ecosystem right now. And it's really infuriating because, like, I'll give you an example. Some of the lefty shows, like Sam Cedars' show, Majority Report, they take callers. And I've noticed that there's like this pattern of people like who watch all of the different shows, and they'll like call into Sam's show, for instance, and be like, did you hear what this host said? And then they'll like, of course, mischaracterize what the host that they're talking about said, and then try to like instigate some sort of conflict. Guys, I know that many of us are still stuck at home. I know that it can get boring, but like take up a hobby, some woodworking, like we're all good. Let's try to find ways to unite the left, not instigate fights and conflict among them. But anyway, Ida, as always, it's always so great to have you on. And we have a lot of stories to get to, including the latest from the Derek Chauvin trial. We'll play some video from the trial today. Since we produced that story, there have been more updates, which I'll share with you as well. And then probably my favorite story of the day, although it's depressing, has to do with a school being renamed in Florida. And the folks in Jacksonville, they have thoughts about slavery and the history of this country, and they're going to share those details with you. So can't wait. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about what Koch-funded organizations are already cooking up to defeat election reform legislation. The election reform bill, known as HR 1 or the For the People Act, is incredibly popular with the electorate. It would expand voting rights. It would ensure that people who want to vote will easily be able to do so. But the people who aren't so happy about this are the individuals who love doling out dark money in order to bribe our politicians. And so I'd say the Koch brothers, but really now it's Koch brother has come out talking about how this needs to be defeated, and they're already engaging in focus groups to figure out just how to do that. Now, the New Yorker was able to obtain audio of a private conference call that took place. And this conference call included all sorts of conservative dark money groups, also an aide to Mitch McConnell. And they were expressing their frustration over the popularity of this legislation and what they can do to defeat it. Without further ado, let's go to the first video, which features an individual who works for a Koch-funded organization. I don't want to give too much away. Let's take a look at what he has to say, and I'll fill in the blanks.
Most people have never heard of the phrase HR 1. So over 60% of people just had no idea what we were talking about when we said, have you ever heard of HR 1? However, when presented with a very neutral description of HR 1, people were generally supportive. And the most worrisome part, which Grover mentioned at the very beginning of his presentation, is that conservatives were actually as supportive as the general public was when they read the neutral description of HR 1. And so, as I have here in my don't slide, this isn't just a matter of like finding conservatives and then activating them on this in a public way. There's a very large chunk of conservatives who are supportive of these types of efforts.
So he's not celebrating the fact that even conservatives are supportive of this legislation. That is seen as a huge problem throughout the entirety of the audio that the New Yorker was able to obtain. And the person that you heard there is Kyle McKenzie. He's the research director over at the Koch-run advocacy group known as Stand Together. Don't be fooled by its sweet sounding name. It's a terrible organization, and they want to ensure that corporate interests and the powerful elite in this country have more of a say in our democracy than you do. And so conservatives do like the legislation because it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. The fact that we have dark money funding campaigns, the fact that we have legalized bribery in this country, the corruption is something that upsets both sides of the aisle. And so they're trying to find ways to kind of outmaneuver the popular messaging that comes along with this type of legislation. And it wouldn't just get rid of dark money. This legislation calls for the public financing of campaigns, which is a really, really big deal. And that goes in addition to, expanding voting rights, ensuring that people are easily registered to vote if they're eligible to vote, and what have you. But before I get to more sound featuring this Mackenzie character, I wanted to hear some of what you had to say about this, Ida.
It's funny because I watched Judas and the Black Messiah early, and I realized that Fred Hampton was only 21 years old when they killed him. And people were like, yeah, he was trying to unite the people. He was trying to get the people all black and the Rainbow Coalition. The reality is that they killed him because he was coming for capitalism, right? And anybody who comes from capitalism, I mean, Jesse Jackson has been talking about anti-racism for forever, and he's still here. Fred Hampton at 21 was murdered by the US government. And I just think about how these agendas, they're so important to those interests because they really do manipulate everything that happens in our environments. And why, of course, racism is bad, white supremacy is at play. It is a function of capitalism. And then when you think about this, these are the people who don't care about the quality of your water or your air, who don't care that the laws are, rigged and not in your favor, and that they have, labor, this free labor that continues the slavery legacy of this country. So when we talk about these things, it's so deep and so it's so much invested in where our communities and how we live our lives, all of the people who are not in that top 1%, that this kind of stuff should really move us to really understand who we're voting for and what they're voting for in government. And it's not just about the president, but that is why it's so important to understand who you're putting in those seats to go represent you in Washington and who represent you in local government.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I really appreciate about this story and the fact that, the New Yorker was able to obtain this leaked audio is that it gives you a clear sense of how the sausage is made, really. Because don't think that, you have these incredibly brilliant lawmakers who are super strategic and they sit around thinking analytically about how they're going to push through some legislation. No, that's not how it works. There's all sorts of gross corporate-like behavior happening in our political world, and that includes the focus groups. That includes more of what you're about to hear from Mackenzie in the clips that we're about to have you listen to, because it's not about having a democratic process where the will of the people reigns supreme. This is a conversation about breaking the will of the people or manipulating people to think that legislation that would actually give them the ability to be part of this democratic process is awful. It's terrible. And so what are they thinking about? What did they find through these focus groups that they engaged in? Well, Mackenzie is about to share more details about his findings in this next clip. Take a listen.
Don't get into a fight in HR 1 where you engage with the other side, where they have the talking points. HR 1 stops billionaires from buying elections. Unfortunately, we found that is a winning message for both, the general public and also conservatives. That simple message, but far and away resonated with people. And when they had to compare that message versus tons of other ones, they were most persuaded by that. And they found that to be most convincing and most, it riled them up the most.
Wow, congratulations, Kyle. I guess that's why they pay you the big bucks. We're surprised. We did a focus group and we found out that people don't like money in politics. Wow. Congratulations, Ida.
You know, what's funny is that you and I, we've talked about this stuff before, and we know who the real enemies are, and who really gets off when we struggle, because it's so profitable. The struggle of the people is so profitable for those at the top. And this gives people insight into all the little moving parts that are in play to keep you oppressed and suppressed and frustrated and hungry and broke. And just the reminder that even though the American people have suffered horribly as a result of this pandemic, those people have gotten richer as a result of this pandemic. And we need to really take all of this into account, because while we're having these culture wars and these fights on Instagram and on Twitter, those are the people who are benefiting from it. It is so profitable for them at the top. We need to really, really, really realign ourselves and in this fight, because the quality of our lives are getting worse while theirs gets better.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And understand that the context of this conference call that they're having is this necessity to manipulate not Democratic voters. They consider Democratic voters a lost cause. They're having a conversation about manipulating conservative voters specifically. That's what this is about. So what were more of the findings from this focus group? Let's take a listen.
Perhaps most sadly, on the don'ts column here, the last number 5, and this is a major reason we undertook this research, was just to simply test whether the phrase cancel culture could be attached to HR1, and using that to motivate the right would be helpful. Unfortunately, at least in our max diff exercise, where we had messages against other messages, this concept of cancel culture didn't really resonate with people. So our phrase was something very akin to HR1 is the left's attempt to use cancel culture to cancel conservatives, something like that. And it really ranked in the bottom.
Dude, political corruption has its, I don't want to sound too optimistic because I'm not, but political corruption, I feel, has its days numbered, because again, we're talking about conservatives here, right? And conservatives have been propagandized by GOP lawmakers regarding cancel culture endlessly, and they're not buying it. I mean, they believe that cancel culture is a problem, right? But they aren't buying it in the context of dark money or money in politics, corrupting politicians, bribery that essentially takes us out of the equation as individual voters, really. They're not buying the argument. They're like, oh, you're gonna bring up cancel culture. You're gonna bring up cancel culture to try to manipulate me into thinking that money in politics is a great thing. No, not buying it, right? So I love that, because it also, to me, reveals that even conservative voters seem to be increasingly aware of class as opposed to other identifying characteristics, right? So rather than see their billionaire conservatives as their homies, they're like, they're not like me. My situation's a little different, and that's a good sign.
Yeah, it is. And you know what one of the things that I think about is that a lot of people who are conservative in their views, it comes from, their upbringing, religion, and where they come from. And they really believe those things. They believe in those things. They believe in whatever their religious doctrine that they've accepted to guide their lives. And they are noticing that these people are manipulating those things for profit. And yeah, there are a lot of people who want to identify with Donald Trump who lack education, and or not just Donald Trump, because I don't even think Donald Trump is a conservative. You can't be a conservative when you smashing, porn stars and you got all these baby mamas, because that's not in alignment with conservative views. And that's just not me trying to, that's just true. But I just think that it's important that people realize that their personal beliefs, their specific values are being manipulated by these people for gain. And I'm glad that people are starting to wake up, because those people really believe those things. They believe in those things, and it's attached to their Jesus or whatever it is that they believe. And now here these guys and people come along to say, you know what? Check this out. And they're like, nah, we're good. We're good. And I'm glad.
I am too. Now, I'm also aware of the kind of fight that billionaire conservatives are willing to engage in. And I don't want anyone to think that this is going to be an easy battle. Of course, Republican lawmakers are going to try to fight this tooth and nail. Democrats in the Senate specifically have become more willing to at least discuss reforming the filibuster in order to pass this type of legislation in the Senate. Remember, as the legislative filibuster stands today, they would need 60 votes total in the Senate in order to pass this type of legislation. So the first order of business would really need to be filibuster reform, or my preference would be to do away with the filibuster altogether. But this is a must-pass piece of legislation for Democrats if they wish to have any type of political future, because as we've seen over and over again, as we're seeing right now in states like Georgia, Republicans are doing anything and everything necessary to game the system to their advantage to ensure that they get the votes, and anyone who wants to vote for Democrats will have a difficult time doing so in some of these battleground states. We do have one more clip to get to. Let's take a look at that, and I'll give you some more details about what HR 1 includes.
The one message that seemed actually to work, and I know this won't be intellectually satisfying to a lot of people on this call who really want to engage in this fight. The message that seemed to work, right, was simply that Congress shouldn't be focusing on this right now. Our country has much bigger fish to fry at this moment, which I think we can all agree with. And so the two examples we used were healthcare and the economy, right? There's still an unbelievable amount of people out of work in the country. Congress should focus on getting people back to work, not on, these kind of niche donor disclosure type of endeavors we're working on. Obviously, we don't have the luxury of maybe making that statement because we do need to refute the other side's point of view. But from a mass communications point of view, that is one of the most effective messages.
Okay, great. So we know what actually did resonate with the participants of this focus group, the allegation that there are other fish to fry. But what the Democratic Party needs to do a better job in, and they need to be prepared ahead of time. I mean, they just got a giant hint about what this campaign is going to be about. They need to have a message ready about how we're not going to be able to fry that fish unless we have a democratic system, a democratic process in place to ensure that the will of the people is effectively communicated to lawmakers. And you're not going to get healthcare policy. You're not going to get economic policies that benefit the best interests of the electorate if you have dark money pouring into these campaigns, and if you continue to protect this system of legalized bribery. And if you think it was a problem before, just consider the fact that elections are going to become more and more difficult, considering all of these, anti-voter bills that are passing in places like Georgia that make it increasingly difficult for voters to cast their ballot. So this is an important piece of legislation because it at least begins to address the core problem that we've noticed in our democracy since the Supreme Court ruled in Buckley v. Vallejo, and then of course that subsequent ruling on Citizens United. We do not have a sound democratic process right now because it is being undermined by money in politics. So if you actually want something done about all those other agenda items, including healthcare and the economy, you're not gonna actually get what you want unless you do away with that virus, you do away with that system of legalized bribery.
So, the science that goes into divide and conquer, it's amazing to listen to it, right? To hear, because that's what it is. the term billionaire conservative and billionaire liberal to me just sounds crazy, because I don't believe that you're either a liberal or conservative. If you're a billionaire, you just align yourself with whichever agenda is going to make you more money. Because I just think that being able to sit on that much money, knowing all of the problems of the world, has to speak to a certain type of psyche. And me, I wouldn't be me if I didn't do me. I'm sitting here looking at this stuff, and I think about it from the perspective of people of color, Black people in this country. The world, America, they had to give up one of their greatest resources, that was free labor. They gave it up, and every single day they work hard trying to figure out a way to get back to that. And that prison industrial complex, and it just sounds like a bunch of bitter, rich white people that are in their fields because they don't have an opportunity to exploit the American people in a way that makes them money, so that they can continue passing that money on to their children and their children's children, while our children starve and get shot in the street. So I just think that when I hear these stories and I hear this kind of stuff and I read about this kind of stuff, just sounds like a great temper tantrum for people who are sitting fat based on the work of hundreds of years of people that were kidnapped. And now they're like, how do we do this again? And people think it's extreme, and they think I'm a conspiracy theorist. But if you don't look at the way that America is running right now and how it's trying to work its way back into slavery, and that the American people have always been a casualty of this toxic capitalism, I don't know what else to tell you, man. This sounds gross and disgusting. And the fact that he's so monotone and having this conversation lets you know that is just robotic and scientific, and it's economic. What is not is moral. It is not humane. It is not rooted in anything that has compassion or empathy for the people of this country. It is all based on manipulation. And we need to really be awake, because it's just happening before our very own eyes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The manipulation is just part and parcel of what this whole conversation is about. And just to remind you all, I really want to drive this point home. This is an incredibly important piece of legislation. It must pass. The New York Times called it the most substantial expansion of voting rights in a half a century. It would transform the way Americans vote by mandating automatic national voter registration, expanding vote by mail, and transferring basically would prevent Republicans from being able to draw districts or gerrymander the way that they've been doing. And that's incredibly important. It would take that power out of parties and have actual nonpartisan experts make decisions about how districts should be drawn. And that's important as well. So we'll stay on this story, give you guys more details as we learn where the legislation is in the process, but don't be fooled by the nonsense coming from these disgusting billionaire grifters who are, dude, Charles Koch, he's like 110 years old. Like, let it go, go enjoy your wealth, leave us alone, okay? Stop trying to destroy what little we have left of our democratic process. For now, though, we got to take a break, and when we come back, we have some updates on the coronavirus situation in Florida, a state that was applauded for doing so well. But are their numbers accurate? We'll give you the details on that and more. I've got all sorts of exciting programming notes with you, starting with Old School. It's Tuesday, which means after the post game today, Old School will air. If you're not a member, you should certainly become one, because members get that whole show. If you're not a member, you get like a little tasty taste, right? Just a little, this is delicious, but I want more. How can I get more? become a member. One of the easiest ways to do that is through our YouTube channel. And special thanks to all of our YouTube members for helping to make this show happen and for supporting us. Let's also talk a little bit about what you can look forward to on the conversation, because as we've been talking about on the show lately, you have the state of Georgia, unfortunately passing some disgusting and backwards voting laws in order to prevent specifically Black voters from being able to cast their ballot. And on the conversation this week, we're gonna have Representative Park Cannon, who's gonna talk to Dr. Rashad Ritchie about that legislation and what can be done moving forward to kind of mitigate the damage that'll be done to our democratic process as a result. This is super exciting because Representative Cannon is giving us an exclusive interview. No interview with CNN, no interview with major cable news networks or major networks. This is gonna be an exclusive conversation on the conversation this Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time to 2:30 p.m. Pacific. You can check that out live at tyt.com/live. And also, we've been nominated for a Shorty Award, and voting is gonna end really soon. It ends tomorrow. Please help get TYT an award for its election coverage in the Shorty Awards section for Best in Live Event Coverage. You can go to tyt.com/shorties to learn more about how you can vote. And again, you can vote once a day until Wednesday, March 31st, but that's tomorrow. So try to vote today, and please support us because we'd love to win an award for all that hard work we put in for the election coverage. All right, we got a minute left. I'm gonna read a few member comments, starting with Kathy Hastings, who has a comment about Matt Gaetz. Now we know why Matt Gaetz is considering leaving Congress. He is under investigation by the Department of Justice, bars started, over whether he had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl 2 years ago. So I just found out about that story right before going live. My goal is to read up on it and hopefully share more details with you guys at some point in the second hour. But thank you for notifying all of us about that. Spicy Flanders, of course, Koch brothers and the Republican bootlickers are opposed to the right to vote. Republicans know they'll lose in a free and fair election. You're right about that, which is why they consistently try to game the system to their advantage. Instead of taking a look at how unpopular their views are, their policies are, they've decided, well, why don't we just cheat? Mickey C also has a comment, which I will read when we come back for our next segment. Okay, see you there. Welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian, Ida Rodriguez with you. And I want to read a quick member comment from Mickey C, who says, in response to the last story we covered, other fish to fry, there are 20 committees in the House, countless subcommittees, working on a lot of different policies at once is the norm, not working on just one at a time. And you're right, that's a really great point. I mean, in theory, right? In theory, they're working on a lot of legislation at the same time. Although what we end up getting from Congress is far less than that. And part of the reason why is because they're beholden to their corporate donors. So this is why the For the People Act absolutely must pass. My favorite provision in that legislation has to do with publicly financed elections. Will we actually get that by the time it makes its way through Congress? Probably not. But if we can do something to mitigate the flow of dark money and money in politics, I think that it would be tremendously helpful in empowering the voices of actual individual voters as opposed to corporate interests. With that said, though, let's move on to the great state of Florida, which has been getting a lot of applause for the way that they've handled coronavirus, but maybe they've been suppressing some numbers. So let's discuss. A new study seems to confirm what many have already suspected regarding the number of coronavirus deaths in the state of Florida. Now, Florida, under the leadership of Governor DeSantis, was one of the first states to open things up and just go back to normal as if we're not dealing with a global pandemic. And what was interesting was, fairly recently there were comparative analyses done, showing how California fared compared to Florida. Florida opened everything up. California at the time had still shut everything down. But the numbers of coronavirus cases and deaths seemed pretty comparable. So what was going on there? Well, it turns out that some researchers argue that the way officials in Florida count coronavirus deaths is a little skewed in a favorable direction for DeSantis, and I'll explain how. Researchers came to that conclusion by comparing the number of estimated deaths for a 6-month period in 2020, that was from March to September of last year, to the actual number of deaths that occurred, a figure known as excess deaths because they exceed the estimate. There were 400,000 excess deaths known, or excess deaths across the United States in 2020, okay? So when you look at Florida specifically, the researchers say 4,924 excess deaths should have been counted as resulting from COVID-19, but for the most part, they were ruled as having been caused by something else, thus lowering Florida's coronavirus fatality count. That's possible because people who die from COVID-19 often have comorbidities such as diabetes and asthma. And so I want to bring you in because as I was reading the way that they manipulate numbers like this, it made me think of George Floyd and how they tried to blame George Floyd's death on anything other than the fact that Derek Chauvin basically suffocated him to death with his knee, right? It was like, no, it was actually the fentanyl. No, it was actually his this or his that. But in the case of corona, obviously that's BS, right? But in the case of coronavirus, I would argue that it's also BS. I don't know. What do you think? And I think you're muted.
Oh, I was like, first of all, you mean Florida manipulating numbers? No. The whole election, I think that enough is enough. The ridiculousness with the people, Florida and Georgia and Texas these officials have been having a field day with this coronavirus and their approach. And meanwhile, the people who are dying are the ones that don't have access to the healthcare that they have access to, or any of the information and the stuff that they have access to. I think that I truly, wholeheartedly believe that they've been manipulating numbers. They've been throwing that in our faces because the people who are dying are people who belong to groups that don't really matter to these people. So they probably have been manipulating numbers because why is it that everybody else has been devastated by this virus, but then places that have a high concentration of people who don't believe it's real? Of course, all of it goes to play together. You have a whole bunch of people who don't think that this is real to this day. People who you're still hearing about fighting about wearing a mask. People who want to continue to have spring break events and parties no matter who's at risk. And then the people who are dying are older people, Black and brown people, poor people, people in marginalized situations. So of course that it's very possible that they are manipulating the numbers because as usual in America, those people don't matter.
Yeah, you make a really great point. Florida is the second state in terms of elderly population. And so I tend to forget about that because when I think of Florida, of course, I think of like South Florida where I visit my in-laws. Right. But Florida has a giant, retired community. And as we know, coronavirus is far more likely to be lethal for elderly individuals. And so, there's also this issue, and it's not just about Florida. You'll notice this throughout the country where depending on where you are, the health officials will decide whether or not to count the death as a coronavirus death or to consider the death as something that was caused by the comorbidity. Now, to be sure, all of the patients we're talking about had coronavirus. It's just that the way that they're recorded really depends on how the health official decides to list them. Is it COVID or is it because of heart disease, right? They might not have died from a heart attack, but depending on their own discretion, the health officials' discretion, they'll decide if it's COVID or if it's some heart issue. Mm-hmm. And so as Daniel Weinberger from Yale mentions in this Yahoo News report, some states classify a death as due to COVID if a positive molecular test was obtained, while other states allow the death to be classified as due to COVID if there is a suspicion that it was caused by COVID, even without a molecular test. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's just no uniformity across the country. And I think that stems from the fact that we never really had a robust centralized approach to combating this virus. I mean, come on. Of course, we get hit with a global pandemic during the Trump administration. I mean, it couldn't have been any other way, right? And there is one other statistic that I want to share with you all because I do think it's relevant. Because excess deaths were at 21% nationwide for 2020, and that's according to CDC figures. Florida saw a 15.5% rate of excess deaths for the period that was studied. California's excess death rate was also 15%, despite that state's governor, Gavin Newsom, having enacted much more stringent restrictions than did DeSantis in Florida. So obviously the difference in excess deaths between California and Florida is notable, and you should keep that in mind. But it goes beyond government policy, state government policy. I think it also has to do with whether or not people are willing to follow through with social distancing guidelines and things like that. So Newsom having strict rules didn't necessarily stop some of these massive warehouse parties that were broken up by cops, when COVID cases were spiking more recently. But I do think that it's fascinating and should be investigated further that Florida somehow miraculously seemed to not follow any social distancing guidelines beginning in August of 2020, and somehow their numbers are lower, much lower than some of the states that had strict shutdown measures. So we'll see how this goes, but don't think I forgot about the fact that DeSantis got one of their data scientists fired because she was accurately reporting data regarding coronavirus cases and deaths. So do I think that there's a pretty big possibility that they're suppressing numbers or at least manipulating numbers? Yes, but I would also caution you about this one study because based on their comparative analysis, it doesn't really seem like the number of excess deaths in Florida versus California is that big of a deal. Really, there's no difference. All right, well, let's move on to a story that needs to be talked about. It has to do with the coronavirus vaccine. Progressives are calling on the Biden administration to lift the coronavirus vaccine patent so that poorer countries can produce their own supply. Now, let me be clear about something before I give you more details in this story. This is not a conversation about rich countries handing over their doses of the vaccine. This is a discussion about lifting, at least temporarily lifting patents so that these pharmaceutical companies share the technology, share the research necessary to produce the vaccine in some of these countries that have been unable to obtain even a single dose of the vaccine for their own people. So for months, the United States has joined Canada, the United Kingdom, and several other rich countries in blocking the patent waiver proposed first introduced at the World Trade Organization last year by South Africa and India. So South Africa and India are really leading the charge in trying to, get access to the information necessary to produce these vaccines. Now, two companies, AstraZeneca and have allowed manufacturers in India, Japan, and South Korea to produce their vaccines under voluntary licensing agreements. But the WTO, which supports India and South Africa's waiver request, argues the terms of that voluntary license scheme being offered by some patent holders are not sufficient to address the current pandemic. And so the calls by progressives for Biden to do something about this continue to grow louder, and that's a good thing. So you have Representatives Rosa DeLauro, Jan Schakowsky, Bernie Sanders, of course, and dozens of other US members of Congress joining forces with 400 grassroots advocacy organizations in urging Biden to end US opposition to this waiver, which proponents say is necessary to distribute sufficient vaccine doses to developing countries. And Biden's thinking about it. So maybe he needs a little more of a push. And if he needs that push, obviously we're happy to engage in that. But we're dealing with a global pandemic. So rich countries hoarding that technology for themselves isn't really going to help this situation, especially when our global supply chain really relies on these countries, especially countries like India, right? So if you're worried about the economic situation, like you should be worried about people's lives, okay? But if you don't care about that and you're more concerned about the profit seeking of pharmaceutical companies, consider the fact that not sharing this vaccine is going to have a negative domino effect on our economy, on our health. This is really something where all countries need to be working together to beat the virus. And right now, profits over people continues to reign supreme, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and so for those of us who were not crazy about either of the choices that we had for President of the United States, who have been very transparent about that, these are the things that we talk about when we talk about this Democratic Party that so many people are, pledge their allegiance to. But here it is, here we are having a conversation about the United States of America and its impact on other countries. And so this conversation doesn't have anything to do with immigration, but allow me to make the comparison is that when we do things like this, which destabilize other countries, it forces people to have to come here or want to come here because they're seeking something that they don't have in their own countries. And these are the domino effects. So when we think about not wanting to give the resources to other countries, and then we complain about why there's so many Indians in America when we are those people who participate in those conversations, these are the reasons why people have to, because the president of the United States is operating in his capitalistic mentality, which is toxic for all of the people. And the fact that the reason why we're in this situation in the first place is because of the global effect of coronavirus, which started in some place called China. And so we don't ever think that things like that are going to affect us because we think that we operate solely as this individual singular entity when we know that it's all interconnected. So when we don't want to help India, coronavirus is not going to get better in Montana because this is the stuff that happens that affects the people throughout the world. And for some reason, those people who are at the top who make all the money, they don't care because they're not directly affected because they're not walking into the stores where these people work and they're not interacting with the people directly. So it just pisses me off that we have these conversations because coronavirus is not going to get better for anybody until it gets better for everybody, because right. That's the reason why we're so affected by it, right? Wuhan is not down the street from here. And yet and still, I have friends that have died of coronavirus here. So it's just, are you on our team, Biden, or are you not? Because we need to know that you're for the people, because you're acting like the dummy that we heard in the earlier story.
Right, and look, one of the things that people need to be aware about is the importance of getting vaccinated goes beyond just protecting yourself. we already have variants of this virus, and it's because it mutates. And so a way to prevent future variants is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. What if in the future there's a variant that's not responsive to the vaccine? That could happen. It hasn't happened yet as far as we know, but that could happen. It is in everyone's interest. It is in the economy's interest, if that's literally all you care about, to ensure that we share these resources across the globe, including with the global South. And so hopefully Biden does the right thing here. But overwhelmingly, my feelings are, considering how this is a human rights thing, a human rights issue, pharmaceutical drugs should not be a commodity. It should be something that's owned by the people. It's already partially financed by the people. It's just that they then turn around, they price gouge us after we help with their research and development. But nonetheless, this is an important story. Please keep your eye on it, as we will, and we'll definitely update you as we learn more. We got to take a quick break though. When we come back, what are your thoughts on a potential vaccine passport? I'll tell you what conservatives think, and hopefully you disagree with them. We'll be right back. Say thank you to our newest YouTube members, Nathaniel Faber, Jan Weisbart, Joel Cruz, William Thames Jr., and Cheerful Boot 30. Thank you so much for supporting the show and becoming members. We really, really appreciate it. And make sure you check out Old School tonight. Since you guys are members, you get to watch the whole episode of Old School uninterrupted. And I know you're gonna love it. I believe this week it's with Cenk Uygur and Adrian Lawrence. So make sure you check that out. Moving over to our super chat section, we have YT Prenude, okay, comment about dark money. Money in politics discredits the free market. I mean, we know the free market is BS. Like the biggest proponents of the free market manipulate it all the time. I mean, if free market individuals would not be in favor of the Fed pumping free money into banks and corporations. Free market individuals would not want money in politics where you get to game the system to your advantage. Anyway, thank you for that comment. I agree with you. Lars Nielsen says, good news when it comes to workers' rights. Oh, this is good news. I read this in the Financial Times today. Volvo Cars will give all their employees around $50,000, 25 weeks paid parental leave. And that affects both men and women, which I'm excited about. Hopefully more companies will follow. Yes, that is a good news story. Thank you for reminding me about it. Peter Hamby says, DeSantis attacks scientists, even rating one to hide the real numbers of COVID deaths. It's all to kiss Trump's tushy. I like the emoji there. That's how Republicans govern. I agree with you. Brian Bowers says, Matt Gaetz under investigation for sexual relationship with 17-year-old. Yes, we are going to give you the details on that story after we come back from our first hour break. I need some time to actually read it so I can give you guys details. In our Twitch sub section, we have EK Greens who gifted 5 subs. The Real Blue Tech gifted 5 subs and 1,000 bits. Man, I have a little bit of Twitch FOMO. You know, I got a little intimidated after I was blocked from the chat because people thought I was an imposter. But I'll make an appearance again. I love Twitch. Ruggedly Handsome gifted 5 subs. Silver Zen 9 months, tier 1 with the comment, hey TYT staff, can you hold on to this for me? It's really heavy and full of important stuff. Sure, I don't know what that means, but okay. Simp Daddy Kane, 11 months tier 1 with Jenk is my hero. I wish Jenk was here to actually hear that, because you guys have been giving me a lot of love and I feel kind of bad. Because share it with Jenk too. Goner in Paradise, 9 months prime with a comment. Happy 9 months on Twitch. Love to see Anna and Ida. I love it too. I love hosting with Ida. And
I gave us a nickname. I said that somebody was like, bring the smoke to Anna's salt. And I was like, just call us Smoke and Salt.
Oh, I like it. That's a good restaurant name. Anyway, we got to get back to the show. Let's do it. Welcome back to TYT. If you're watching live, please like and share the stream. The algorithm loves it. Like every time you do it, the algorithm's like, oh yeah, baby, give me more. So give it more. Share the message of TYT. It's one of the easiest ways to support our show and also spread our message. Now let's get to the notion of vaccine passports and how conservatives are terrified of it because they're mostly just driven by fear. A new Biden administration initiative might soon require the American public to carry around what they're referring to as vaccine passports. Now, of course, we're dealing with a global pandemic. This is an incredibly contagious virus. And so if individuals are refusing to get vaccinated, some of these businesses, some travel locations might want to be aware of it in order to protect their own customers, clients, or constituents. And so this vaccine passport would, of course, prove that you've been vaccinated against the coronavirus. However, the initiative is going to be used and is already being used as a culture war symbol